My name is Marco Morgan. I'm a skateboarder, I'm an urban planner, and I'm an activist that wants to change the way people experience their city and their spaces.
I think he made this shit.
So my mom sent me a message now recently. Like, so I was posting stuff on Facebook about Black Lives Matter, right? And I was sharing some stuff and speaking about JP Smith and
Yes. It's been around forever. How long has that guy been around?
that guy's been there, man. He's
like
been
local.
exactly. He's been in like at a local level. He's been now at the city. He's an MEC of Mako member. You know, and like it's weird, right? But so this guy has been the same person. He's just occupied different positions, you know. But he's the way he sees things is still the same.
Sure.
And the way that I've approached him is still the same. It's just that I found different language to say it. And so my mom sent this message to say like, yo, you can't say this and whatever, you know. People would look at you differently. But in the next line, she says that they won't think twice about shooting you. Right? Because that's the world that my mom came from, where if you did stand up to authorities,
Sure.
they would shoot you.
Yeah.
Right?
Life means nothing.
And for my mom to have said that I'm telling you, it flipped me out. And I was like, that's crazy. Is that what you think? Like, you know, your fear of your child, right? Do you fear that I'm gonna die because I'm speaking out? You know?
And that's very real.
And that's such a real thing. And I was like, so I was kind of going, cool.
So now do you find yourself like trying to censor yourself when you tweet or
So I'm not so active on social media. Like I share stuff about my kids and whatever, right? Like I try to keep try to find the right spaces to speak.
Yeah.
So I'll speak if something really is bothering me, then I'll speak, right? Because I feel that everybody speaks and speaks and speaks, and like you say, like people stop listening, right? It's finding the right spaces to speak. And so I've often found like, cool, you know, get into policy. So government, and I intentionally went into government, wanting to kind of like bring a certain voice to policy, because I believe that policy changes things, but policy doesn't change. It's the whole stream of things. So there's a whole broken system, and that just kind of freaked me out, man. And so now I'm kind of like trying to focus my attention to academia, to kind of say, can I influence academia to get closer to the ground and what's happening? And can I bridge that specific divide?
You started a weekly skating event where kids would meet up and skate along the promenade. This evolved into you getting into policy making and getting skate parks opened. Can you tell me about that journey?
So it's not just so much about the promenade, right? It's more so I was skating alone, right? And then I started teaching kids in Sea Point how to skate. And teaching is a bad word because you don't teach skateboarding, but sharing my skateboards because I had loads of skateboards. And what kind of happened was that we would be bussed by security guards and cops. And I saw that a lot of the kids that we were skating with, like these, like black and colored kids in Sea Point, would get more attention from securities and cops than what I would, right? Or that a white kid would, right? And it was weird because the same experiences I had as a kid, these kids were experiencing. And one in particular, there was a little boy named Leah Borna, and he would get bussed by securities all the time. Right, and he had this persona that would tell the cop like "beep you," you know, and it's like a 10-year-old kid, right? Pick up his board and run away. And what became really weird was that my first words for him were like, "Man, just kind of leave it, you know, grab your board, quiet down, and walk away from the cop, and like live to skate another day," right? That's because that's what we get taught, like, you know, live to skate another day. Say "yeah, boss" and move on. Right, And then it became a real problem for me to hear this all the time, to see the kids getting picked on, and then it became an issue. And so then it started like a kind of whirlwind from there. So from seeing what I experienced to seeing what this kid experienced, to then going, there's a problem. So what is the problem? The problem was this bylaw, and how this bylaw kind of gave legitimacy to this weird prejudice, right? And so then I started kind of going after the bylaw and started fighting for spaces and opening up the promenade. And then we created like promenade Mondays. And promenade Mondays, as much as it's like so many little white kids running around and skating and whatever, the intention was to place an activity that this conservative community hated, to put it right on their doorstep and to show them that it can happen, you know. So all these like happy, smiling white kids that are skating and whatever, it's actually a big middle finger to this conservative like community of Sea Point to kind of go, fuck you, you know. And that's what it was. That's what it is. That's what I'm laughing at. That's what myself, Earl, Andre, that started this thing. That's what we laugh at, because that was our intention of creating this thing.
Okay.
And it sort of like went from there to opening up skate parks, but ultimately changing this policy. This changing policy would mean that we would have legitimacy to kind of to skate in certain spaces, to have the rights to stand up to a cop and say, you can't take my skateboard, you can't arrest me for this, you can't tell me to get off the road. So it started going into that kind of avenues. You know?
So how would you recommend people go about changing their local law and changing their environments? What was the kind of outline process of what you had to do to get into that?
So at the time that I was doing that, I was also working in government and I was writing policy, right? So I was writing transport policy, and engaging with all these like lobby groups. So cycling lobby groups and taxi associations, and it really became interesting as how engaged they were with the system. And certain groups were more engaged with the system. So democracy means you need to participate. The more you participate, the more influence you have in it. But it's not just about how many meetings you go to, it's about how you participate. And so certain groups like the taxi associations were really smart about it. So they would protest, they would have their lawyers in meetings, they would manipulate the system so that they could benefit in a certain way, right? The same thing with cycling groups. They had enough influence on where they cycled up the mountain with the politicians and played games, golf with them. So they had influence with them, right? But as a youthful activity like skateboarding, we had no voice and no way to influence that shit. So the idea was to really get people to participate. So change perceptions and get other people to carry our voice. So a bunch of teenagers, how do you make the mother of that teenager go and carry the voice of that skateboarding community at a local council meeting? Right? And so it was really about activating a community that raises its middle finger but never engage throughout the system.
Interesting. So does that mean interacting with local political representatives, or does that mean actually just going straight to the government?
So, yeah, I mean, like, South Africa's got a really interesting democracy, right? So we got local government and your local councillor. So your local ward councillor then speaks to his district, which is managed by your sub-council, and then you also have MACO members like JP Smith, and then the mayor, and then the province, and it's all these, like, it's super complex, right? And all these systems are there, and it makes it difficult for an individual to kind of participate in the system. It also makes it difficult for even organizations to kind of participate. So you have to be strategic about how you lobby and how you raise certain issues. And I think the system is broken in the way that it tires people out of the system, right? So like my whole focus around with skateboarders, but also with other community organizations that I've been working with, is how do they raise their voices and how do they be smart about raising their voices in the system. The only way to break the system is to know the system.
To play golf with them.
And play golf with them. Yo, man, you've seen me. Like I've been smiling at cutting ribbons with Mako members, and yeah, man, you know, so you gotta
Rub shoulders with them.
rub shoulders, right?
Yeah.
But you also need to ensure that you can hold them accountable. The shit thing is that these politicians know the system just as well, and they know the system so much that they can tie you out. It's their day to day, right? So they can tie you out. They can change where the weighting or influence needs to be, right? So they give favor to certain organizations or certain interests that they have. And when I say interest, they can also do like the same thing as prejudice, you know. So J.P. Smith, for example, he's a Mako member of Safety and Security, right? But he has a certain prejudice against a certain group,
Sure.
right? So he doesn't like graffiti. Let's say for one, he doesn't like graffiti, and so he puts more resources behind getting rid of graffiti or suppressing the amount of graffiti, right? And what's weird is that previously they had given him the portfolio of arts and culture, right? So he had both the hand of enforcer as well as enabler. So the very mandate that said we should help graffiti and nurture graffiti was given to him, right? And now it's given to some other dude, a doctor, that doesn't understand the culture, right? So it's all these people, these politicians that don't have an understanding of the culture, are not willing to engage with the community that holds the values of that culture, and a community that's also fragmented in a lot of ways to actually engage with those people that have the power to enable that culture.
What are you currently looking forward to or working towards?
So I'm studying at the moment, right? So and I'm studying because I worked in government for a bit. I worked with different citizen organizations. I worked in my own personal projects as well, and I never understood the system entirely, right? So I'm going back to study to understand the system, and so I'm doing an MPhil in Southern Urbanism, but my thesis is actually looking at culture. It's looking at where culture exists and where it thrives. So I used to manage arts and culture center. Actually, I manage a portfolio of arts and culture centers for the city of Cape Town, and saw how broken the system was, and how difficult it was to change the system even from within. So I'm going to study it so I can make determinations about it, right? But so it's about, my thesis is looking at does culture exist in like these arts and culture centers, right? And do these arts and culture centers, do they nurture a certain culture? So particularly like in townships, does jazz happen in a space that you kind of demarcate, this is where jazz will happen? Or does happen in an arts and culture center, or does it happen at the taxi rank? And if it happens at the taxi rank, why are we not investing into the taxi rank where it could rather flourish than try to bring everybody into one particular space?
Like for you, what is the definition of culture? And what is the difference between that and art?
So I mean, culture and art are two different things, right? So culture is art is just I suppose the
medium?
Yeah, the medium, the production. It's the production of it, right? It's a reflection. But culture is like the certain set of values that exist in a particular community. So if, and I think this is where people kind of confuse heritage and culture and tradition and whatever. It doesn't mean that white people have a white culture and have hold on surfing and rock music and whatever. Right? It's a community, whether it's different races, that hold a certain value to a particular art expression. So jazz could be enjoyed by the jazz community that's made up of different people from different backgrounds, but they share that culture.
Yeah, I think that's what's so interesting about hip hop, is that it's become so international, you know?
It's everyone, right? But it's at certain values that kind of grounds it. And I think that hip hop, like skateboarding and whatever, right? It's it often, the values is about the struggle, right? So it's about reflecting a certain struggle, right? And so there's common values amongst those things. And I think that's why hip hop thrives in a black community, because hip hop thrives on the underground. like jazz. There's a little sticker that I saw. It says, "Jazz grows best underground." And I was like, "Yo, that's such a brilliant sticker." Right? Like it places everything into context. Because that's the like the context it needs to nurture itself, right? Yeah.
It's true. No, it's true. It's kind of like graffiti, how it becomes, what's the word? Sanitized when it's like in a studio space or it's not in the street. It's got a different energy to it. You know, even how the artist does the graffiti is different. So it's not raw anymore. You've become a father of 2 children. What kind of life lessons has that taught you, and how has that made you more outspoken and more cautious as a person?
I see. It's a tough question. Yeah, I got 2 kids. Okay, so I think also like it's, I think one of the important lessons, like I'm just like reflecting on before my first child was born. So his name is Pablo, and we were staying in Salt River, and we had Coke in the fridge and had beer and whatever, right? And the first thing to do was to say, how do we clean ourselves up so that we can make sure that this kid is good, right? And at that time it was about thinking through. My wife was breastfeeding, so and she was like, oh, you can't have this because it'll affect what happens with the child. And that really was quite profound, because whatever we consume gets passed through onto the child. And so a lot of it is about thinking about us and how we live our life, the spaces that we live in, and what's the best we can do for our child, right? And how do we kind of guide them through that process? And so it sort of changed me in a lot of ways to reflect on decisions that I make. It's not so quick to catch on shit anymore, Like even with skateboarding, like I won't lie to you, man. Like I question myself sometimes. So like skating at night down Signal Hill is cool. Let's go, no questions. 2 beers, let's go skate Signal Hill. Now I'm kind of going, shit, no, maybe let's wait until the morning. So you kind of become more cautious about things, and you're more mindful about your caution, which is a lot, So yeah, I don't know. It might be a thing to do with youth. It might be a thing to do with my kids. But there's certain situations that are forcing me to grow up a bit, and think about certain things. Yeah.
Okay, so just not be so much suicidal with your skateboarding, right?
It's fun. Like I love skating. I love skating. Right? And then also that steals away from. And I understand why. Like I look at the young kids skating, right? I look at the young kids skating, and it's actually quite amazing, because what I'm trying to achieve is their fearlessness, and what they have now is what I'm trying to get back to, where they don't think about shit, they're gonna fall and break a leg or whatever, and that's really, really cool.
The world's kind of on edge at the moment. There's a lot of things in the air. Where do you see things going?
Yeah. So I actually saw someone asked a similar question, like about Black Lives Matter movement, but also the same could be said about like COVID. Right? It puts us in an uncomfortable space, for us to grow, and so for Black Lives Matter, it forces uncomfortable dialogue. And uncomfortable dialogue can only help us grow. It can help us make certain decisions and how we move forward. I think it's a long time coming. It's like 400 years too late, but it's here, right? And so it's a necessary conversation. I think with COVID-19, it's the same thing. It's forcing us to think about how we engage, right? And forcing us to think about how we're responsible as a collective, right? So this notion that we are responsible for each other, and I've seen like loads of things about together we can, and together, right? And all this shit from government about together, right? But this thing actually places that responsibility on everybody, right? And it really it says that I'm responsible for my kids, and my kids are responsible for me because they infect me or whatever, right? However they interact. So there's a certain level of responsibility. So it's forcing that real collectivism that we speak about in society that don't necessarily see manifest, right? Yeah, I know that's deep, but yeah, I think that our institutional systems or our economic systems don't do that. It forces us to think that it's them and us. You know, there's the rich and there's the poor, and it's this weird binary that determines how we respond to things. You know, so the rich look after the rich, the poor look after the poor and aspire to be the rich. You know, and that's a shit society. Whereas this kind of thing is starting to have those difficult conversations about going, cool, if we don't look after the homeless, it will affect the rich, you know?
Were you familiar with the Occupy Wall Street movement? Yeah. Where they basically occupied Wall Street in parts of the world, and they basically made Wall Street go to a standstill. But the problem was when they started to band together and be like, okay, what do we want? What are our demands? What are we trying to get out of this? And obviously, everyone was so fragmented. You know, there were all these tribes, you know, like the black voice and this voice and that voice, and they couldn't actually come to an agreement about anything in the end, and they basically dissolved and they lost all the control and all their power and all their influence. And if you look at history, some of the biggest problems we've ever had with history is that, yes, when revolutions happen, that once a certain voice or certain group take over, they end up becoming a tyrant in their own regard, be it Hitler or whoever, you know, even if they might have been, even if they might have been the voice of the people, which is so weird. So I don't know if, I'm a bit cautious about everything, but I mean, how are you feeling about it, and how are you feeling what needs to happen, and like, what are the steps forward, really?
So I don't know what the steps forward are, right? So like there's always, from politicians, there's promise, there's always the word change, you know, like Obama, change, Musi Maimani, change, you know, everything's about change.
Better is kind of change.
Yeah, it's about change, right? But there's always these vague terminologies about things. And there's very few organizations that actually are specific about what that change needs to be. And so like when it comes to election time, I'm always kind of like reading through the manifestos of these political parties, right? And seeing who has a plan, what's the details of the plan. Does the plan make sense? Is it rational? Who does it affect, kind of thing, right? Whether it's my interest or whether it's collective interest, kind of thing. And those that are in power don't have those plans in place. And that's a sad situation. So they're promising change, but there is no clarity about what that change is, you know? So I think, but I mean, for the way forward is that it's okay not to know, you know, like it's okay to kind of be comfortable that there's a problem. And so maybe the first step is to acknowledge that there's a big problem, you know, and that something needs to change, right? And then open up the discussion. I know I'm tired of discussion and dialogue, right? But open up the discussion so that we can come to some kind of consensus about what change do we want, whether it's in education or whether it's in culture and creativity, and, you know, like, think about those changes. I think that, like, I mean, we constantly leaning on politicians and policymakers and whatever, right, to determine those things, but we're never leaning on people. And so people will actually start to tell you what their needs are, what their immediate needs are, right? Not what their wants are, but what their needs are. And artists are really good at reflecting that. Right? So we don't sit and listen to what the artist is saying or see what's happening in the art, but art is actually a good reflection of what's happening in our world, right? And so, yeah, it's about finding different ways to listen instead of like ward meetings and council meetings. Like there's other ways that people are speaking. Find another way.
I feel like there's no role models in popular culture. How do you feel about this? Do you think there are any role models in society that you could tell your kids this is a good person and you should aspire to maybe be like them?
Yo, man, I started wanting to teach my kids about like what are the stories we learned as kids? And so I went into YouTube and wanted to tell my kids. So my son has long hair, and I wanted to tell him about people that have long hair. And so took up the story Samson and Delilah from the Bible. Cool. Went to the Bible, right? And who comes down in this YouTube video is this white Jesus, white God, white Jesus. And my son's like, so we speak about God and things, right? That's given. And my son asked, "Is that God?" And I put the video off, and I'm going like, "No." Like, are those the images that you want to portray, right? So even like looking up and role models, right? I don't think that we need to get kids to aspire to be anyone. I think we got to get kids to aspire to certain values rather than certain people, And I think that there's that's different. So it's like giving information, and then as a parent to guide them as to how to consume that information. Like for me, I think that's important, right? So I don't teach my kids about fancy cars and you need to become a doctor or whatever, right? You need to become happy. Be happy. Aspire for that, right? Rather than things and looks and people. Because I grew up in a certain kind of space where is what you want to aspire to be a certain way, a certain person, rather than the person that has certain values.
Yeah, you need to get that Tamagotchi.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways, man, like, so when I was growing up, my parents took me out of an Indian school, like a Indian school, and put me in a white school, right? And all my heads, all my like teachers and principals were all white males, right? And that's, for me, that's a very disturbing kind of space, is that the space of authority is always a white male. And so I'm kind of being quite intentional now with my kids, is not to put them in that similar position.
Is there any message you want to give to yourself in the future?
Yeah, I want, like, I don't know. So like thinking about that Facebook memories thing and whatever, right? So I mean, like, yeah. So you get like these Facebook memories, right? And I always kind of like, so it only goes up. I think I got into Facebook like 2010 or 2009 or whatever, right? So it's almost like my life started then, right? But actually, there's a whole life before that, right? I kind of constantly reflecting on those things being said, and to say that there's a common thread, and the thread is that there's like I always want to change something. Like if there's something wrong, I want to call it out, right? And so like it becomes harder the older you get, and the more you become more fearful about speaking up and speaking out. Right? And so if there's any kind of message I kind of want to keep telling myself is, don't be fearful about that shit, Like stay honest and stay true, despite losing opportunities and whatever, and friends and whatever. Like speak your mind, My dad was that way. He was someone that said it as it is in a difficult kind of way, but he was honest in it. And so like that's a good kind of measurement for me, was like to measure against my dad, and to say like, are you honest, right? Whether you lose friends or lose whatever, Yeah. So hopefully I'm still calling out shit when I'm 50 and 60, I suppose.
So Cape Town is different things to different people. What is Cape Town to you?
It's more than just a space, it's people, right? And who are those people? And like there's a bad heritage to this place. There's bad history, there's good heritage, but there's a common culture, and I think that's something that's interesting. And I think it's something that's surfacing now during this COVID-19 and whatever, is that there's a desire for people to want to help each other, right? It's not seen every way, but there's a desire for people to want to start to break those divides that colonialism and apartheid and all that stuff brought. there's a desire for people wanting to change those things. And so that's kind of cool. And that's the people. It's not the politicians. It's not the banks and the corporates. It's actually the people. And so there's something on the ground that's like really, really beautiful. So I think that's, for me, that's kind of cool. Like the stories of the people. I think it's fascinating, dude.